Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Augmentiv think tank. I'm joined here with Alan Tang. He's the co-founder of CoLab. Alan, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Well, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, so I'm Alan. My background is not in education. I kind of fell into it having worked for Elon Musk's online school. I used to do all sorts. I was in corporate finance and renewable energy. I was a chef for a stint, and then I worked for startups, helping them grow and scale. But I fell into education because I really love how it can really make a difference. In founding CoLab, this program that uses games, escape rooms, and discussions to teach kids the skills they need for life, has been one of the best journeys I've been on.
Yeah, so one of the things that obviously strikes me about you is that it is your really unique career path into education. Sort of fell into education myself. I started off life as an accountant, also from a sort of finance background, and then decided I really didn't want to do that. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, so took a career break as a private tutor, and then ended up sort of then making my career in education. Can you tell us a little bit about your career path and how you've maybe things you've learned along the way?
So I used to think that careers were quite linear and that you would just, progress through the ranks, do the same job for 3 years, maybe move to a bigger company, a better company, and keep going down that route. And like you, accountant, qualified, then moved to corporate finance. And for me, that was a way to sort of help and give back. So working in this renewable energy space and building these onshore, offshore wind farms was really great. But end of the day, I came to realize that it was just about money for my bosses, for the company, and which not a bad thing necessarily, but I joined for the purpose of trying to do some good. And when, we're building these wind farms, but then stopping them or selling them, I was like, well, where's the social good? So I pursued my second passion, which was becoming a chef, which is so different. And a lot of people often ask me, well, did you train? How did you know you could do it? What skills did you have that were relevant? And for me, the biggest thing was just having the confidence to try it. And I think that really changed my mind, being able to hop in from knowing nothing to working and being a sous chef at one of London's best restaurants. You kind of just realize that if you put your mind to it and you really try and you really care, you can make a difference and you can get to that point. And that was transformational for me. So just learning to understand actually skills are really, really relevant wherever you go. Working as a chef, you learn how to deal with pressure, how to communicate well, how to work without sleeping, like all these sort of different aspects. And it's kind of played into this fractional career that I have where I am a chief of staff to different startups. I have my own company in CoLab, and I also do a lot of volunteering work. So I'm currently a school governor. I do a lot of advisory work and coaching work, and they all kind of intersect, but they play on different parts of my skill set or experience. And it's just a way for me to share that with others.
Yeah, I think that's a realization I had about the transferable skills as well. I think I'd sort of thought I'd locked myself into a career when I left university and started to qualify as an accountant. And then when I realized I didn't really like it, I kind of thought, what have I done? Have I just wasted time? And then actually the skills that I learned there have been incredibly valuable in building my own business and sort of understanding how business and especially finance actually works. And although even though I may not have enjoyed them as much as I thought I was going to, the skill was definitely really, really useful. And I guess that's something that we try to pass on to our students. I think students are more and more aware nowadays that they're unlikely to be locked into a specific career for the rest of their lives. But thinking about because CoLab is all about teaching kids skills. What do you think about how we could embed transferable skills into the curriculum or into the sort of core schooling system? How do we help educate students in the skills that they're actually learning and how to communicate that?
It's a really hard one because society is always going to need those basic skills, right? So English, maths, science. I think those are fundamental, the arts as well. But I think that the thing that a lot of young people tell me these days is that they don't see how it's relevant to what they want to do. So if I want to be an influencer, or if I want to be an engineer, or if I want to be an artist, how are these, or a business person, how are these skills getting me to where I need to get to? And I think if we could communicate that better, then the engagement piece would be better, kids would be learning better, and then it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You said earlier about you became a bit disillusioned and actually you later came to realize that those skills are really useful. I think every decision that you make, every experience that you have adds up and takes you to the point where you need to be. So I don't have an education background, but I found a lot of the coaching experiences that I had, a lot of the work that I've done previously kind of lended itself quite well to the education space. And like you, some of those experiences weren't enjoyable, but they taught you resilience. They taught you how to come back from a mistake. They taught you maybe how to work in big groups. I think that's a message that we really need to sort of send to young people. In terms of how to embed it, I actually think learning by doing is one of the best things that you can do to learn. So, and then just experimenting and making mistakes, right? So I think a lot of people see failure as a really bad thing, but failure for me is just the first attempt at learning. It's kind of you've tried something, it doesn't work. Okay, what could I change? I think the important thing there is reflecting on what could have done differently and then trying it again. And that's something that we embed in CoLab, right? So the culture itself is very supportive. It's about testing out your hypotheses. And when someone makes a mistake, we don't say, why did you do that? It's kind of, okay, it didn't quite work out. What could we try differently? And because it's a game, because it's an escape room, it doesn't really matter. And I think that's the thing we find, that we're giving the kids the curiosity and the confidence to explore, which then lends itself to other parts of their lives.
Yeah, I find this all the time in teaching because like my background is teaching science and maths, mainly chemistry. And as a tutor, I do get to work with kids who are super passionate about chemistry, but I would say more often than not, I'm meeting students who really hate chemistry and need a bit of extra support. And I've always found that somehow reframing it as low stakes as really, really works. So often just, going down the rabbit hole, veering off topic and exploring something they might be interested in as works in getting them engaged. But I don't think it's necessarily because it's something they're interested in. It's sort of like, that's a door that they've opened for me. So if I say, they come and tell me, I've read this thing, is it true? Then they've opened this door for me. But I think I've always felt that the reason it works is because they think, oh, this isn't going to be on the test. So, we can just talk about this and explore this and it's just interesting. And actually, if you're clever about it, you can use it to teach content that is on the test and they've sort of learned it without really knowing. And I guess that's sort of a big part of the idea of gamification in education. It's I think too often seen as like, let's just put reward systems in place. And you'll do some questions and then you will earn some energy and then the energy flies the rocket to the moon and you're like, how are those things related to each other at all? But I guess with what you're doing with CoLab, it takes a very different approach. I know it's sort of more skills based than the academic content, but tell us a bit more about the approach to like learning these skills that you take in a CoLab session.
So I guess it ties in really well with your previous point, Carl. So engagement is probably the biggest challenge that a lot of schools haven't solved, that teachers haven't solved. If you have a student who's engaged, who feels like they have agency over their own learning journey, the kids will want to learn and they'll be asking these questions. They'll be curious. They'll be exploring different things and they'll be looking at it in their spare time. You don't have to force them to do it. So when we set up CoLab, the idea was, how can we teach kids the skills they need for life in the way that they want to do it? So the vibe is very much 2D pixel art, sort of Zelda, Pokemon-esque. Their parents have described it as kind of Pokemon meets Sherlock Holmes. That's really powerful because as soon as they see the platform, they're like, okay, this is familiar, it's nice, I'm curious about what it could do. And you already have those, you've piqued their interest. And then the first thing we do is that, 1 hour a week, the kids meet in the same cohort every week with the same 2 facilitators, the same 10 friends, 11 friends. And they get presented with 3 challenges. One's a game, one's a discussion, one's an escape room. And they get to choose which one they want to do. In that process, they're developing student agency. They're developing their voice. They're learning how to, compromise with each other. They're learning how to communicate, how to negotiate. That in itself is a skill, but also it allows the kids to think, okay, I'm choosing what I want to do. The teacher's not telling me. And we're not teachers, right? We're facilitators. We're there to go, to coach, to guide, to nudge, but we're not there to tell them what to do. It's very different from a traditional classroom. Once they get into the challenge, we don't tell them how to play it. We say, this is the goal, whether it's the escape room to get X points to, I don't know, beat this challenge in 50 seconds, whatever it is. The kids then have to figure it out. And through that process, they have to work together. They have to ask questions. They have to experiment. They have to make mistakes. And it's all part of that process. It's learning without feeling like it's learning or doing homework. I think that's really powerful. So one of our most recent challenges is based around the Odyssey. So in the Odyssey, there's Odysseus and his men get trapped in a cave by Polyphemus. Do you know it, Carol? The Cyclops. So there's this cave which is guarded by a Cyclops, and Odysseus and his men are trapped, and the only way out is to get the sheep and hide under the underbelly of the sheep. We've made that into a game where it's all about sharing. So you have these Cyclops roaming around, you have these sheep roaming around, and your goal is to get the sheep and the coins before you leave, before the time runs out. The challenge is that only one player can move at one time. All the Cyclops can move throughout. So then how do you share the moves? How do you delegate? How do you communicate? Oh, there's a Cyclops next to you. You need to move. And it starts to allow the kids to think strategically, to coordinate their movements, to share under time pressure. And I think that's a really important skill, because that's something that is a situation they're going to face time and again in real life. And by doing that through this sort of gamified process, again, we don't tell them a learning objective, but they start to learn these skills. And their parents will email us afterwards and say, look, I've noticed X, Y, and Z in my son and my daughter. Isn't that the point of education, that they're actually learning this and applying it to real world situations, everyday situations, which actually make a difference in their lives? So a parent told us that one of their son is making friends easier. He's always struggled to make friends. He made 6 friends at the airport last week. Like, that's an amazing thing.
Yeah. That's the best testimonial you can ask for, right? Have you thought about doing this for adults? So hearing you describe it then, and I remember when I had my sort of early demo of it, I always thought, I'd love to do some things like this and learn do my CPD this way,
It's interesting. So we have run it for adults, and because I think a lot of adults probably don't have these skills and they should learn it. And when you do it as a game or virtually, it feels less sort of like personal. It's not you. It's quite cool. We've run it with adults, one of which is an escape room, and we found that most adults find it really hard because they want to be so perfectionist that they're too scared to explore a door or to open something because they think there are consequences. And it takes a lot of unlearning to get them to the point where they are comfortable. But, that's the point. The whole point is we want you to learn these skills and apply it to your day job. When we ran it with this C-suite, the CEO was the one that dominated the conversation. And through our coaching and nudging, we actually got him to take a step back and let his team speak first. Because as you know, when the CEO makes a decision, everyone else is like, yes, 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 that makes sense. But actually, when you say, okay, CEO, speak last, see what happens, they were able to beat the challenge much faster because they're able to work together, they're able to share ideas, and through that come up with new solutions, as opposed to it coming from a sort of a top-down hierarchy.
So interesting. Yeah, I could see the value in getting that aligned. I mean, I think any leader has struggled with delegation or struggle with, surrounding yourself with people that would challenge ideas rather than just agree with you. And you could see how that could really rebalance a team. So it's interesting that it's one of those things that would work across ages. I mean, there's always this sort of, I think it was Ken Robinson who sort of popularized it, but there was a study, I think it was it was a test that they used to do with NASA scientists. And they were like trying to figure out how diverse a thinker you were. So it's not like academic based, it's not content based. They just get to solve puzzles. And they found that like really young children were amazing at this. They'd all be NASA scientists. This was the only condition. I think it was like 98%, like past the threshold. And then as they age and you keep doing the same test with the same groups of children, that ability just disappears. I think it was like 15-year-olds. It was only like 30% of the same children, so it had already dropped. And then adults, it's like 2%. It seems to be that the reason is that the confidence, as you say, so when you put it in an environment, you then have, low stakes again. So
you see it, right? When I think there's the spaghetti building challenge where you use spaghetti to build the highest tower. And when kids do it, they'll keep failing, they'll keep experimenting, but they make something that's very stable that works. Whereas adults will start planning and think, oh, you do this, let's all come together at the end, and they build something that just doesn't work. And it's just, there is a story there. You also mentioned CPD earlier. So we often work with a lot of schools, and we ask the teacher to sit in on our CoLab classes as a teaching assistant. And what we find is that a lot of them pick up on the coaching techniques, the Socratic question techniques that we use, and they start to apply it in their own classrooms. And that, as you know, as a teacher, leads to a better learning environment. The teachers actually report back that their attendance is up, the kids are more curious. Grades are better because the kids are asking more questions. They're actually interested in the subject and themselves. I think there's something there as well. And, whilst we do currently work with schools, with parents directly and some corporates, I would love to just use this as like a way to help everyone level up, because I think coaching is such a good skill that is probably underutilized in our day and age.
Yeah, for sure. So if you are teaching a set of skills, and I think obviously we've talked about some of them like communication, problem solving, things like that, what are the like core skills that you're trying to embed in the students that you work with?
So the angle we've taken is, okay, what are the skills that employers want? What are the skills that you need when you sort of graduate from university, from college? And for me, that's stuff like, okay, communication, leadership, critical thinking, emotional intelligence, resilience, impulse control. But also, ultimately, I think it's about, can we give you the confidence to try something? Can we give you the ability to ask good questions and knowing when to ask those good questions? Also, can we help you be a problem solver? In my day job, I don't get told that, someone will say to me, Alan, I need you to build me a website. I need you to come up with a commercial strategy. I need you to set up a finance team. There is no playbook for this stuff because it's unique to that business. I can't just go onto Google or ChatGPT and be like, hey, how do I do this? It might give me some ideas. I need to tailor it. And through that process, I have to think about, okay, what's the biggest problem? How do I get there? How do I break it down to its constituent parts? And how do I solve those individual parts? If you can teach someone that skill, then they can solve any problem because they can use the resources at hand to solve it. And for me, this is why I think the whole assessment piece within education probably needs to change. Currently it's very high stakes. I think it puts a lot of pressure and it only really assesses a certain way. What if you change that so that it wasn't about what you remembered and whether you could recite, a 10,000 word essay, but more about whether you actually understood it? I don't know how many spelling bees you've been to, Carl, but the last one I went to, these kids were spelling 10, 15 letter words, but you ask them, what does it mean? They don't know. And it kind of defeats the point.
Yeah, that's the spelling bee example is quite an interesting one. Yeah. I mean, you get this all too often. I even feel like it was a bit like that in my own education, that I was really good in school. I was good at science and maths. I do my A levels. I'm really good. And so I go to Oxford, and then I realize I know absolutely nothing. I didn't know any of the stuff, but I was really good at gaming a paper. Like you could tell me how to do something and I could remember how to do that thing in the way that you told me. And so when I saw a similar question, I could then answer it. And I think this is kind of one of the things that I guess is to some extent a misconception of what private tutoring is for most people, but it also is something that happens all too often, is that you can just get someone who's very, very good and very knowledgeable of the paper to come and sit with you and say, well, if you do it this way, you are going to get a good grade. You might not understand what any of it means, but you'll get a good grade. And one of the questions I was going to ask you was sort of, in your experience, so you've come from the synthesis tutor, and that's something I wanted to talk about a little bit later on, was like your progression through synthesis, and they obviously made this pivot to AI tutoring. Do you think that the prevalence of something like AI coming into the world is going to help people ask better questions, which seems to be the sort of core skill that we're talking about that's useful? Like, helping people to have the capacity to ask questions? Or is it going to make people just, I guess, follow instructions more? And so it ends up pushing people down the bad education pathway, let's say, that might get good grades but might not develop any skills, rather than the upskilling pathway.
There is an element both. So with AI, we know that it can come up with, lies and incorrect answers. And I think there's a skill in understanding and fact checking. And I think that that's something that maybe our generation can do, but maybe other generations struggle with because they're so used to what I'm told is the answer. So that's something that we need to, I guess, learn as a society. But the other thing is, it will change. It will just change the way the world works. At the moment, if I think about using AI, generative AI is great, but you can also use it for, brainstorming ideas, using it to write pretty good, PhD level research papers, writing pitch decks, right? Like all this stuff that takes a lot of time. And I think what that will mean is that the world we live in and the jobs that are available will completely change. So then if that's the case, how do we prepare our young people for that world? And it's scary, but it's also exciting, right? So it means that there are loads of opportunities that haven't been explored. How do you grasp them? And it's about giving our kids this range of experience, this range of skills that so they start to know when to apply them. I think education can be quite siloed at times. You think that maths is just, I use it in the maths lesson, or I use it in the exam, or I use it when I'm doing mental arithmetic. But actually maths is also relevant in design. It's all about proportions. If we taught it that way, then maybe people would be more interested, but also we would start to think more of an interdisciplinary mind. And I think that's really powerful. The work that LIS are doing in London, amazing, because they're starting to develop this sort of generalist mindset, but you have particular spikes in certain areas. That makes you really, really potent in this new world, because then you can start seeing other aspects. There's a book called Black Box Thinking, one of my favorite books. And it talks about how if you bring together people from diverse backgrounds, from different industries, they can solve some of those biggest problems. I think they said the fatality rates in planes are really, really high. Then they brought in an engineer from with completely different background to come in and have a look. And they completely changed the process, and fatality rates dropped 90%. Isn't that powerful?
Yeah.
I think that, that diversity of thought is a really strong thing that I really champion. But going back to your question, we need to start teaching our young people how to use this the right way, how to also think for yourself, because AI can make you lazy. It can take away the thing that makes you human, that makes you creative. And, if you talk about synthesis, I think AI Tutor is great. And I think it can teach kids maths, which is very much foundational. But then how are you getting that feedback? How are you getting the inspiration? I chose to study economics because my economics tutor was great, and he inspired me and got me really obsessed with game theory. Would I have gone down the same route if it was just a robot? Probably not. And I think in education, it's quite easy to go down extremes. We should only have homeschooling. We should only everyone should be in school, or we should, exams have to be this way. Why can't we take the best from different parts and build something that works for the child so it is bespoke? I think with AI, you can actually end up going down this personalized learning route. In the past, it's impossible because it's just too much work. But now, absolutely possible. And I think that we should be using that to our advantage.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that in most successful businesses, this of bringing diverse thinkers in is quite well established now. Like, it's something that people talk about often and say we need to bring people from different industries and bring people in. But I just recently had a debate with people on LinkedIn where I just posted something about whether tutors should have QTS or not, qualified teacher status. And the responses were really interesting. There were people like from different camps. Everyone was trying to make sort of balanced views on it. But I see this quite a lot. And I see people, I actually never see parents ask for it, to be fair. I've never actually been asked by a parent, the hundreds of parents that I've worked with, are all your teachers qualified teachers? But I do see people like attaching themselves to that as a sort of USP. And again, like we were just discussing, diversity of offering is important. So having a broad range of this is important. So having, QTS only tuition providers is important. But I wonder if they're missing a trick from all the inspirational people who perhaps move from industry and have a really interesting background and are capable of doing the inspiration piece, as you said. I don't know what the background of your economics tutor was, but you often think that, people who've had really interesting experiences in their life usually bring quite a lot to the table, whether they're a qualified teacher or not.
So going back to your point about, I guess tying this back to the tutoring idea, I had a tutor growing up, and my mum and dad got me the tutor because they thought it would help me in my 11th class exams and get through that stage, and it did. But what I learned from Fiona, my tutor, was how to be human, how to really, just a lot of those life skills, how to think, how to approach certain things. The stories she shared were the most powerful parts. And to this day, we're still really good friends. That was the key thing. It was almost like a mentoring approach. I didn't need to have a tutor to study. I could have done it myself. What she did was give me the confidence. She inspired me. She just made me a more rounded human being. And I think that's the thing that a human tutor or coach can do. And it's why, a lot of my peers, they have coaches. They spend a lot of money on coaches. And when I look at them and the trajectory that they're on, it makes a massive difference, because their job is to hold a mirror up to you and get you to face certain fears or concerns in a way that helps you grow.
Yeah, it is really interesting, isn't it? That you don't, I wonder if it's part of the teaching profession to some extent, that you can be sort of entrenched in a field where you might not necessarily look for that support in the same way, especially if you're a private tutor and you are working from home and it's remote. I guess that community is quite hard to find. If you were like let's say you're a private tutor just starting out in the industry, you're right at the beginning, do you have any recommendations on how you could find that support initially that might be so, game changing in your trajectory?
I mean, it's parallel to my career, right? I'm a fractional chief of staff. I work on my own. A lot of my clients are remote first. So I don't have anyone I can learn from. I have to be proactive in this respect. So yes, I can read all these books and they do help. But, reading a book about leadership is not going to make you a leader. So then I find going to events really effective. Things like Lunch Club, where you're just talking to people and learning about different industries. On Lunch Club, you meet a random person based on these interests in AI matching. I didn't know that it was illegal to own gold in South Africa.
I didn't know that.
It's illegal. And I was like, what? Why? And it was really cool to learn that. And then, maybe I'll use that fact somewhere in the future. But these little things you start picking up, signing up to newsletters, things like Exponential View, what's it called? TLDR. They really help you sort of learn a lot of commercial awareness, which I think you can apply and make things relevant. Then there's also getting a coach, talking to people on LinkedIn. I don't have a background in education. Now we're starting to learn a lot of stuff there. And it's just about talking to people, being curious, asking questions. People see networking as a really bad thing. I don't see it as networking. I just see it as asking for advice and giving back where I can. And if you have that mindset, you really are just a lifelong learner. Shouldn't we be? Like, if we're educators modeling behavior to the younger people, shouldn't we be curious as well and asking all these sort of questions and continually learning?
Yeah, 100%. I've noticed, it's interesting that you said events, because I've noticed this recent sort of trend, maybe in the last year or so, of people slightly like pushing back on events and saying they're a bit useless. And I felt that I got my start in the industry from going to these events, largely because I could meet people I wouldn't have just bumped into in the street, and I could go and ask them a question and they were sort of expecting that to happen. They were expecting someone to come and ask them a question. So even if I could bump into these people in the street, they probably wouldn't like me accosting them and asking them opinions on the future of education and all this kind of thing. And I made, great contacts and people that I still speak to today even from going to the very first event that I ever bothered to attend. So I think in one way, you see people saying, we are just recycling the same content to some extent. If you go to these events, there's a lot of conversation about the same sorts of things. But I wonder whether we're sort of, by dismissing that, like missing the trick, which is that we're a melting pot of people who are right at the beginning of the career, might ask a naive question, and often a naive question can be really eye-opening for those people who are like super experienced and think that they have this really, clear vision of what they want to achieve. So yeah, I wonder whether, sorry, go on.
Sorry to interrupt. I just had a thought. I mean, it's kind of the litmus test is can you explain something that you know, right? And if you can't, you don't really know it. So yes, it might be a really obvious answer or obvious question, but if you can't explain it in a way that someone who doesn't understand it can start to understand it, then you don't understand it either. And I think that, especially if your tutors are fully remote, just going to the event's quite good because you start to meet people. You develop those relationships better when it's in person. Going to Melissa McBride's disrupted event last year, I met so many amazing people there, and it really changed the trajectory of not just my career in the space, but also CoLab. I met some really, really amazing people there, like Ephraim Lerner, Alan Greenberg. And then I went to Bet recently and they had something called Table Talks. And essentially it's just 12 people on a table. You don't need to know each other. And you're talking about, are your learners thriving or what the future of the curriculum should be. And loads of people just brought loads of great ideas and everyone took something away from that. And I think that's really powerful. I didn't expect to enjoy it. I didn't expect it to be good, but I'm selective with the events that I go to. And if you do that, you will actually find you will benefit from it.
So one of the questions I wanted to ask you, so you talked about your career move at the beginning where we said you sort of started in finance and then you followed your passion into becoming a chef. And I sort of think about my own move into education. I think I was actually, by my friends, pegged as a teacher quite early on. Like everyone said, you should go and become a teacher. This is like your thing. And I said, absolutely not, because education is like the world's most boring industry. And I think so I had this view of it from the outside that it was something that I just really didn't want to be involved in. And now it's all I think about. I eat, sleep and breathe it. And then even perceptions outside my own perception, when we were raising money, for one of my businesses, we kept getting knocked back by like non-education investors who essentially just said, education is a boring industry. I mean, the phrase we got from multiple people was, education is just not sexy, is it? And so what was it that actually brought you into education?
So I got headhunted for a job at Synthesis. And like you, I was like, I could never see myself working in education. It's boring. Nothing changes. The cycles are too long. And this company, Synthesis, it blew my mind. So their idea is, can we use games to teach kids, communication skills, help them be collaborators? And the assessment process was really funny. It was, film a video of yourself talking about your favorite board game, then join one of our Synthesis games, play it. And it was an assessment center. So it's very obvious that if you've done these before, that, your job is not to actually play the game. Your job is to bring others into the conversation and all this stuff. But going through that process, I was like, okay, this company's different. And then when I joined, I started teaching there, being a teaching assistant, then running classes. And I really saw the impact this way of education could have. This idea of Socratic questioning to get the kids to start thinking deeper, answering a question with a question, sort of talking of using these debrief moments as a chance to talk about macro themes or specific things that you wanted to highlight, doing one-to-one coaching as well on the side of that. And it made me think, okay, these kids are progressing at such a rate. This is not the education I know. And to give you an example of this, I remember running a tournament and it was the final round of this tournament, one of the younger kids was nominated as the leader for the final round. She's 8 years old, doesn't deal with pressure very well, and she was nominated. And then she had the self-awareness and the confidence to say, "Team, I don't think I'm right for this role at this point in time. Can I nominate Alex?" Just the fact that you have the confidence and the ability to articulate that at 8 years old in a high pressure environment, it's like, wow, okay, there is something here. And yes, synthesis evolved and changed over time, and now it's this sort of AI tutor. It still does, this sort of play-based game as well. For me, I think education needs to have that human touch. That's kind of been the theme of our conversation. You need to have someone who can inspire you, can guide you, can coach you, can be like a confidant that I don't think an AI necessarily could. I think that's the thing that this sort of ed tech space is probably missing. Maybe it's not the most scalable and maybe it's not the most investable, but don't you go into education to help kids, right? And if you are, then shouldn't you be building products that are useful? I went to this event recently where everyone was like, I'm building the next Duolingo. I'm building these whiteboards that have AI embedded in them. I was thinking to myself, do we need another Duolingo? Do we need another whiteboard that has AI embedded? Like, what's the benefit here? And I think sometimes we need to remind ourselves, are we building for the right audience?
Yeah, I often wonder this as well. And I often wonder of like the disconnect between what we as adults might find engaging and what students actually find engaging. And I remember like the early days of this AI boom, everyone kept talking about how engaging students found it. And then every student I talked to was like, it's just like a search engine. Like, it's not engaging. Yeah, it's helping me do my homework, which is why I'm using it. But I wouldn't say I'm like excited by it. It's just saving me some time. And I guess for us, as busy adults, any sort of thing that saves us time seems quite exciting. But for students, they're not quite there yet. And I remember one of the conversations we'd had early on about how we were going to design the online school was all around like how it should look. And how it should look. And I, like you, went for an approach of like, keep something simple and let's do something like, I want to do something like Zelda based, like you were saying. And we got a lot of pushback from investors and from people advising us saying, kids just won't like this sort of thing. And I felt, well, they all play mobile games. Many mobile games are in this style. Like this is something they're used to seeing. But as adults, all they could see was like, but this is how games looked in the 80s. Like now it's got to be picture perfect, Call of Duty-esque, and that's the only game that children play. And I just thought there was like a massive mismatch between what we think kids like and what kids actually like.
So one of our best challenges is called chicken tomato. It sounds absolutely ridiculous. It is a bit of a ridiculous sort of idea in the sense that it's like multiplayer Pac-Man, but instead of the yellow guy, you've got a chicken, and instead of the white dots, you've got tomatoes. What we've come to realize building these games is that actually the kids quite like the old school graphics. They really quite like the sort of retro feel to it. And the mechanism doesn't have to be super crazy. If anything, they should be quite simple because it makes it accessible. You shouldn't need the latest laptop, the latest, fastest internet to be able to access something like this. It's about the way you frame it. It's about the storytelling. It's also about the objective. So in this game, you're literally trying to get as many tomatoes as possible. Some of them require you to get to a certain spawn and go back down to zero. Some of them require you to have a race. Some of you require you to avoid all the tomatoes. And the kids like it because it's so simple, but yet hard. And there's that sweet balance of it's just hard enough that you keep failing or losing, but not so hard that you want to give up. What are those games? Bloodborne, I think that's called, and on like
Dark Souls and things like that.
Dark Souls, like those sort of games where you just keep, getting eliminated. People like that, and I think it's because they want a challenge, and it's just about finding that balance. I also think that it's very important that you make these games in a way that is not addictive, and it should be fun and it should be educational, but it shouldn't be so addictive that you just play it 24/7, 7 days a week with no benefit. Because I like Minecraft and I like Roblox, but I have concerns there about safeguarding. I have concerns there about learning. I have concerns there about how long some kids spend on it. And for me, everything here is about balance. Parents have asked us, why don't you run CoLab 7 days a week? We'll pay you for it. Yes, we would make more money financially and it'd be better for us, but would it be better for the kids? I don't think so. Kids should also be doing other things outside of CoLab, whether it's dance class, learning how to ride a bike, playing football with their friends. All of this stuff adds up to making them a well-rounded individual.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. And there are a lot of apps and games and things that I think do sort of go down the addiction route and have very little payoff. I mean, maybe I'm just rubbish at languages, but I find that Duolingo helps me learn languages like not at all. My wife is Ukrainian, and I've been trying to learn Ukrainian for what, like almost 10 years. And I use Duolingo like every new year. I'm like, Duolingo, I'm going to be on it, going to make the world's biggest streak. It's going to be great. And it turns out my vocab is amazing. I know all the words individually, but you ask me to form a sentence and I can't do it. And I wonder whether that without, again, going back to that same piece that you were saying earlier, the facilitator role seems to be the role that keeps you on the right path, stops you from grinding and just doing the simplest thing that gives you the highest reward return, and so keeps you actually progressing.
Well, they should push you, right? So, like you, I've been doing Duolingo for ages. I learned Portuguese for a wedding, and Portuguese is a very hard language. And I found, like you, grammar was amazing. I could say certain phrases or words, but if you were to ask me to have a conversation, absolutely no chance. I can maybe say, this is too expensive, or where's the bathroom, or how much can I have the bill? And they're like, great. And then they say something else to me. I'm like, do you speak English? And that should not be the result after a year of learning. I think in this day and age where it's possible to, get a tutor in Spain who speaks perfect Spanish to teach you Spanish, it's definitely possible. And then you start to learn, I guess, colloquialisms that you wouldn't learn from that. If you try to learn Cantonese, the written Cantonese and the spoken Cantonese are two very different things. You wouldn't know that if you just did it on an app.
Yeah. And I guess also they make good businesses because it's a really easy buy-in to say, like, well, I can do this thing because it's kind of fun. But yeah, what are you actually getting out of it? So I want to leave you on sort of or leave the people listening on a final thought. And a lot of our conversation has been around innovation and even engagement of students, and how to actually, to some extent, get in the minds of the students and remove our biases from what we think that students like or young people like, our biases from what we think education should be, rather than from looking at what's the actual goal, what's the outcome that we need. If there was sort of just a private tutor who's working independently listening to this podcast, what would your advice to be if they wanted to break the mold and do something innovative? Is there an opportunity for them to be innovative with the technology that's available now? What's your advice there?
This is maybe slightly counterintuitive, but it's worked for me. I genuinely think that this space is so big that no one needs to sort of keep secrets to themselves, or like best things to themselves. And just to share, I think, is my advice. Share things, best practice, ideas, knowledge, and they'll come back and repay you in spades. There's a lady that I met at Disruptive last year, Trudy Barrow. She shared this thing called ThingLink, and it was kind of, you build this immersive AI generated world and you can do lots of cool stuff in it. You can embed a lot of cool stuff in there. We've been using that ever since. And on the back of that presentation that she did, she won so much work because she was showcasing it. And I just thought, that's the benefit of her being so generous. And if more people did it, it would not only benefit the kids, but it would probably also benefit them. So, when people come to us and talk to us about CoLab, I tell them pretty much everything, because I think that the more people building in this space, more people investing in this space, more people is working in this space, the better it is for our young people.
That is amazing advice. And I would echo that myself and say, I definitely fell into the trap of keeping cards close to my chest early on. I thought, everyone's going to, I think my idea is amazing and take it. And actually, most people, even the people who thought that the idea behind it was amazing, would be like, yeah, good for you. Can we keep in touch? Like, how can we work together? It was never like, I'm going to go off now into my cave and take your idea. But it took me quite a few years to realize that. So amazing advice there to leave people on, I think. Thank you very much, Alan, for such an interesting conversation. I'm sure we'll talk again in the future and see how things have progressed. But yeah, really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.